Hi, thanks for joining us at our interview with Corinne Joy Brown, a Denver author that came to our library for a virtual author interview. I hope you enjoy it and let us know your feedback in the comments below. Great, so we are here. We are here with a Denver author, Corinne Joy Brown, and I just read your book, Finding Home, that we have here in the library. And it was very wonderful. I loved it a lot. I think like a lot of our younger readers here that are in the library could be this main character in your book. So I really enjoyed it, thinking about all the young folks around me that I know and going, that could be them. Totally could be them. So so thank you for joining us at our library's new author talk series. We're doing these online.
Thank you, Becca. Great to be here.
Yes, yes. So, so you're in Denver. You've been writing for a long time. Now I'm looking at your website's press kit here, and your website is CorinneJoyBrown.com.
Right.
Okay. And you have all sorts of different books. You have something for everybody in the household.
It's starting to look that way, from the first early reader
Yeah,
to a more adult audience. Yeah, it's been a
yeah.
20-year joyride.
Nice. And obviously you like it. You're,
I have really found what I was created for. I think I've done many things in my life. I was a teacher for 20 years, an art teacher in the public school systems. I've been a trained interior designer for 35 years with my own practice. But when I discovered the magic of writing, and it is that, excuse me, and sold my very first book 20 years ago, I realized that's what I wanted to do.
nice. And which one was your first one?
It's called McGregor's Lantern, and it's
Ah,
the story of the Scottish cattle kings, the literal fight to own the free prairies of the West following the Civil War.
mm-hmm.
Excuse me, between the British and the Scottish who came here and literally established a kingdom that, for those of you in the cattle industry, came to an abrupt end with the massive snows of 1886, the blizzards of 86,
Mm-hmm.
followed by the Johnson County Wars, which was a vigilante uprising to uproot these foreign cattle barons and get them out of Colorado and Wyoming. And I was so inspired by all of that and the legacy that they left that I spent 2 years researching the cattle industry. I
Mm-hmm.
traveled all the way to Scotland for 10 days.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote a book that I sold to a major publisher. I got a New York agent, the whole deal. And they asked for a trilogy. They loved book one so much. And it took me all of 20 years to write the sequel and the third edition. They're in one volume. And that's actually at the publisher's under consideration right now.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Neat.
So I would love to think that it would be a book that anyone in Colorado would find a kinship with. It's
Uh-huh.
all based on fact. And it was
Nice.
inspired by some of the great legendary cattlemen
Uh-huh.
who really left a great deal to be admired. So,
Mm-hmm.
long answer.
No, I love that answer. That is awesome. That's great. That's I actually have that coming through to our library. I've already actually ordered that one. Once I
Great.
got done with the other one, I looked to see what else can I get my hands on,
Well,
and
I
it's
hope you
should be on the next courier truck.
enjoy it.
All right. Well, so I've got some questions for you, as all interviewers should.
Sure.
So, if you were to come across somebody who had no idea who you were, what kind of books you write, how would you describe your books to someone like that?
What a great question. You know, I'm a native Coloradan. There aren't too many of those anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I was raised in the 1950s when black and white television was all the rage. Back I remember the first color TV programs, and almost every other program was a Western.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a horse when I was 7 years old, and
Nice.
I grew up thinking that I would either be a cowgirl or marry one. Those were the options.
Mm-hmm.
And out of our family of five, I was the renegade child that my parents couldn't figure out where I came from or how I fit into the larger picture, because my life was filled with horses and cowboys and everything about the West. You know, I went on to go to school back east in Boston, but I came home every year, and I was the only one of all my siblings who decided to settle in Colorado and stay here. And, you know, that is, may not have anything to do with your question, but the truth is, if anyone were to ask me about my body of work, 8 books, they all have something to do with the West and with the question of identity, who
Mm-hmm.
we are, how we got here, and how we come to be who we are. And I think that might have something to do with the fact that my parents escaped World War II in 1942 at the height of the war. They were very lucky to get out. They came to this country to meet family that they really didn't know. And my father, who was a doctor, started a practice in Denver. Um, it's an amazing story of readaptation and survival. And I think, as the first generation born in America, I have been searching for what it means to have roots, deep roots, or the first
Mm-hmm.
roots. So that would be the answer to the question. If you look at all my titles, even including the book on the boy born with Down syndrome, I spent 2 years researching the community of persons born with disabilities. Uh, and that was an introduction to me to a world I knew nothing about and am now a great supporter of. So
Mm-hmm.
all the books are related in that way. They're all about identity, who we are.
Okay. That's awesome. I like that. That makes it where I can easily, as people are coming in and asking, what can I find a book about this or about that? Now you're going to pop in my head and go, okay, let's look at these books. That's great.
Good.
Okay. So to get transported with the book.
Well, I can tell you the book is set in 1889, and
Mm-hmm.
I put in a lot of time researching the period so that I could write an authentic historical fiction novel, which was a big dive for me. I'd never written a book before, and there I am testing the limits of what it would be like to go back to that time. I also taped people during my journey through Scotland in order to get the brogue exactly right. And
Mm-hmm.
many of the critics or reviews written about that book um, praised the accuracy. I even had a Scottish editor who was impressed that I stayed true to Highlands or Lowland Scots in the dialect, depending on who was speaking,
Oh, no.
which is something you may not be aware of, but it's not the same language across the
Mm-mm.
country.
Right.
And that being said, I fell in love with the Scots. My last name is Brown, which is one of the names that the McGregor clan chose when they were forced to adopt the clan structure, which was something that happened after the takeover of the English to the Scots. The, the clan system was abolished, not forever. They brought it back. But
Mm-hmm.
I was adopted into the McGregor clan officially. They've been great supporters of the work. And the hero of this book was based on the story of Rob Roy, 200 years to the day, in a sense. My cattleman, Hugh McGregor, instead of facing the Duke of Argyll and the English prisons, he's facing the American government and the Wyoming Stock Growers Association. There's a lot of conflict. That's what drives a good book. But I made sure that he was a faithful legacy to Rob Roy. So if you know your
Mm-hmm.
Scottish history, you'll appreciate it all the more.
Oh, nice. That I look forward to that. That sounds like it's going to be excellent.
And it's also a romance. When I was
Oh,
picking
good.
the book, I didn't intend for it to be one, but when it was when I was out there looking for an agent, I submitted it to a major agent who said, "Well, give me a comparison. What's the book like?" So I said, "Gone with the Wind. Take Gone with the Wind and make it a Western." I said, in that it's a triangulated love story set against a time of conflict and change in which
Mhm.
America was growing instead of being post Civil War. It's the cusp of the 20th century, and many things were changing: the end of privatized banking, the rise of women's suffrage, the cross country railroad, and the end of the last cattle drive. So it was a very historic period in which all those things are reflected.
Oh,
You're going to love it.
yeah, I think I will. I think I will. Oh, so while I was checking out your website, I noticed that you have a lot of different kind of books, like we touched on a little while ago.
Mhm.
And you have one that you talk about the dinnerware patterns.
Right. So that's probably, I won't say my favorite book, but it was my favorite book to produce.
Mm-hmm.
I was a staff writer for a magazine called Western and English Today for about 18 years. It's a magazine that helps drive the Western wear and
Mm-hmm.
gear industry and is basically read by retailers who are in ranch and feed stores and Western wear stores across America. My
Mm-hmm.
editor asked me to do a story on Western dinnerware, of which there were two or three wholesalers showing these products at the big Western market in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, I took the assignment, started with what was available, and discovered that one of the big new patterns was based on a retro pattern that was created in the late 40s, early 50s, and that had about a 25-year run and was hugely successful. And today, a company in Arizona is remaking it by permission. Um, and I thought, wow, if there was one pattern back then, there were probably a few others.
Mm-hmm.
So I was new to eBay, but I started the research. And I have to tell you, I had set a $500 limit on what I was willing to spend to collect classic examples of Western dinnerware made at the height of what I call the golden Western era, the era of Western film and television series.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you take a look at this book, it has close to 400 photographs. It covers 75 years of
Mm-hmm.
dinnerware production, in which the entire story of the West has been told on a dinner plate. We're
Wow.
talking from the Western expansion to the settlement of the frontier to the rise of the heroes and the legends, the TV icons like the Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers, to the Duke coming up in, our movie hero who
Mm-hmm.
defined Western films, to the cowgirl, to the rodeo star. These have all been lovingly portrayed on porcelain, on stoneware, you name it. And until the takeaway or the rug was pulled out from under our industry by China and Japan, Japan may have lost the war, World War II, but they came back with a vengeance. And one of the things the Japanese were great at was serviceware for the Japanese people, teacups and they entered the American market and they put 300 potteries out of business in a decade. So
Wow.
today there's only 4 or 5 domestic ceramic ware companies actually making dinnerware. When you grew up in my era, if you registered at your wedding registry, Noritake, um, I can't remember all the names, but all the dinnerware manufacturers were Japanese. So I wanted to look at that period that began in about 1948 and ended in about 1970. And this book is an homage to those producers who knew that everything Western was hot. Bedspreads, postcards, uh, books, literature, Zane Grey. And so the
Mm-hmm.
book is an anthology. It's actually a cultural overview of everything Western, in which the dinner plate was just a part of that. And
Mm-hmm.
I hired a young college student in Denver who had a fabulous camera, one that I couldn't even afford, a Nikon D40. And she didn't know how to set a vignette or style a photo, but she sure knew how to use that camera. So between us, we took about 800 photos. And I found a publisher who loved the idea of the book, Big Earth Publishing, up in Boulder, Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent her the first 25 pictures. I could not afford a photographer. You know, they all wanted $1,000 a day minimum. And this young lady and I produced that book over a summer. And when I picked up the phone and called some of these factories, they were on their last leg. They were closing after a 100-year run,
Oh,
at least
wow.
3 or 4 of them. And they were so thrilled that I was interested in their story that I was willing to put them in a book that would cover this history. So I can tell you the book sold over 5,000 copies, which is a lot for a niche book. It was
Mm-hmm.
in every Western museum from Cody, Wyoming to, you know, the Autry in LA. I was very thrilled that there was a warm response to the book. And just for the record, if anybody's interested, I still have about 600 copies in my
Okay.
collectible. My book is not a price reference. Um, you know, antiques are worth whatever anybody's willing to spend on them. But there is a website with a company that called Replacements that does put a
Mm-hmm.
value on everything that was made before. And if you need to fill in, they are the first ones to go to. But I can tell you that the collection I have now, my goal was to collect a 5-piece place setting of every significant pattern. So
Mm-hmm.
I have them in 3 rooms of my house and in boxes all over. I have about 500 to 600 pieces, and it has a value today of between $25,000 to $30,000.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
museum collection. I just can't find a museum that wants it. Everybody's out there that's interested. Well, I did find a museum, and I couldn't believe what they told me. They told me to send them a photo of every piece, and they would cherry pick the collection. They would just take what they thought was interesting.
Oh, then
And
it's
I
then
said,
it's not a collection.
right, it's a collection that has a chronology and a provenance, and there's impeccable history behind each group. And you would do well to showcase them and revolve them in your museum. You know, it's an opportunity for somebody to
Mm-hmm.
tell the story of America in a little different way. So I'm holding on to them till we move or
There you
whatever.
go. There you go. Okay. Well, so that was just my little side trip down. I don't
I'm
know if
glad you
everybody's going
asked.
to be interested in dishes, but I thought that was awesome because I had that connection.
Great.
So back to this book that I read, Finding Home. This is written for a junior high level reader.
Correct.
Okay. And I'm going to just pop it right here again.
Thank you.
And it was such a great read. You did a great job letting us know what all the lead characters were thinking and having us as a reader know what's going on and hoping that, the next character, oh, how is this going to interact? And, because we knew more than the characters did, which I really like. Um, but so tell us, how did this love of Mustangs come about?
Well, it really started a long time ago when I became aware of the Wild Horse and Burro Protection Act, which was created in 1964 by Lyndon Johnson. And
Mm-hmm.
in the 70s, they started rounding up the wild ones again. There was a massive effort to pick up all the burros that were wandering all over the Grand Canyon. And I remember writing to the BLM and getting a report on the management of the wild herds and how the rate of reproduction was going to decimate their ability to survive. So I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you're aware, but for the last 5 years, there's been sort of an open war on the Mustang populations
Mm-hmm.
throughout. And we have a terrifying number of animals in holding pens throughout Nevada. And their lives are miserable. I mean, cold winters and the hot sun, and it's costing the US government a fortune to feed them every day. Nobody trims their feet. If you're a horse owner, I can tell you it's a nightmare for these wild things that aren't living the life they were meant to live. For a long time, we have a ban on slaughter in this country. You can't use horses for consumption. So they are trucked to Mexico and Canada, where they are part of the slaughter system. It's a painful subject to me, and I've never been an activist. I've never known how to do anything more with my empathy and compassion. And then 3 years ago, the graphic designer that I use for a lot of my work introduced me to an illustrator, the woman who did all the artwork for Finding Home. And over a coffee, she opened a portfolio where I saw a dozen of the most beautiful drawings in black and white and colored pencil that I'd ever seen. And they were all inspired by a Mustang that she adopted from the Canyon City Mustang Training Program. And probably everybody in Colorado knows about
That one.
program. So there's Curly Girl. Her real name is Curly Sue. And my friend Jenny went down to Canyon City with 3 other women who were had an appointment to adopt Mustangs. Jenny did not, but she followed them around and went through all the processes. And when they entered the big pen where these Mustangs were, she saw this 3-year-old filly over by the fence, this spiral-haired American Curly. And if you don't know what that is, it's a real breed. And their hair in the wintertime grows out like a poodle. They have curly locks. It's just incredible. They look like big stuffed animals. Their mane gets curly and their body hair spirals. That was it. She just said, I'll take that one. She had no place to keep it. No, it turns out they will deliver within 200 miles to anywhere in Colorado for free. So she said, give me a couple of days. And she found a barn that would take a wild Mustang. And that was the beginning of the love affair between Jenny McDonald and her American Curly. So it turns out that in the ensuing year, observing her horse and going very slowly, the horse sort of revealed herself to Jenny. And I say that because she found her drinking from a water pipe, for example, when there was a water trough 10 feet away. But the trickle of this water flowing down the side of the hill from a grass hose water pipe was what she was used to. And so she began to take notes on her horse's behavior and incorporated those into captions for these beautiful drawings. She presented them to me and said, could you make a story out of this? I keep shuffling these around and nothing seems to go anywhere, but these are my thoughts. So I looked at her and I said, that's not how you write a book. You start with an audience. You start with a target market. And then you need a relationship. The horse can't live alone. She needs an owner, or in Ginny's case, there are no such things as owners. There are adoptees. We just are temporary stewards of each other. And then you need some conflict, which is the heart of every great story. I said, why don't you let me look at these drawings for a few days and I'll get back to you. And within about 5 days, I had a storyline. And I called her up and I said, I'm going to email you an outline. I think we've got a story here. I said, your horse has entered my heart. And I want to tell her story. And it has to be through the girl that wants to adopt her. But, be careful what you wish for, because wild things are a tough call and they don't always want to be adopted. So the rest is history. I wrote this story in about 6 weeks, at least the first draft. And then we spent 6 months ironing it out. I eliminated 2 drawings of Ginny's and we added another 15 because the story began to tell us where we needed more illustrations. And I have to share with you, I grew up in an era where children who loved horses read the work of Margaret Henry, books like Misty of Chincoteague, King of the Wind, Black Gold. I read Stormy, That was one of her. And I read Smokey the Cow Horse at least 5 times by Will James. And
Mm-hmm.
Black Beauty, I wore it out. So I saw in Ginny's work those classic elements of the illustrations I grew up with. And I'll be honest with you, no offense to today's illustrators, but there's been a huge influence of what I call Japanese anime cartoon
Mm-hmm.
airbrush work. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And the style of many popular illustrators has been dictated by this international trend. And many of them are delightful. But Ginny's work is what I call classic. There's a faithfulness to realism, and there's a deep emotionalism that she has managed to portray in the faces of horses, goats, um, donkeys. You read the book. These pictures speak to you. So Ginny and I formed a partnership. It's called Loose Cayuse Productions,
Mm-hmm.
Mustang-inspired literature for readers everywhere. And we now have a series. In the meantime, Ginny adopted a second Mustang
Oh, okay.
named Lil Bit, who was a dropout from the Mustang Makeover series that's on RFD TV. If
Mm-hmm.
you've ever heard of it, they go to various college campuses and they give out these Mustangs for training. You get like 6 weeks, I think that's it, to take it through its paces. And then there's a competition day. Well, this little horse went through all the paces and then bucked off its trainer during the finals.
Wow.
So it went back to the reject pool or the whatever happens next
Mm-hmm.
pool. And that's the beginning of the storyline for what I think will be a marvelous, I won't call it a sequel, but next in the series. And
Companion piece.
yeah, so we intend to explore the lives of adopted Mustangs wherever they fall. So, listeners out there, if you own one and you think you've got a story for us, we'd love to weave it into a fictional tale that everyone would enjoy.
Nice. And so can people email you?
Absolutely.
Okay. And is your email on your website?
It is. It's
Okay.
Finding Home has its own website. It's mustangcurly.com.
Uh-huh.
And then I
Okay.
have my website. They both have a contact.
Okay. Okay. So if people go to those websites and then they can just hit the contact you and let you know
There's
the
a, right.
story. That is the end of the interview with Corinne Joy Brown, part 1. We will let you have part 2 in just a couple days. As mentioned, she has a website, CorinneJoyBrown.com, and also MustangCurly.com. Both of those websites have a contact button, and she will most definitely write you back. Make sure and send her a note and let her know how wonderful you thought her books were. I'm sure she would love to hear from each and every one of you.